Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to an evening with Luke Harding, and we're in collaboration with the Windosr Festival this year, which we're delighted to be working with again this year, albeit in a slightly different format. Luke has been to the Windosr Festival in person before, and we're delighted to have this collaboration between the Windosr Festival and Chorleywood Bookshop. So welcome, Luke. If I may start with a little housekeeping note, the session will last for about an hour. Luke will talk for a good part of it, and then there will be an opportunity to take questions. So if you'd like to put your questions in through the Q&A or the chat button, and I'll be asking Luke questions, which he'll be very happy to answer. So if I can just take a moment to introduce Luke, and we're delighted, it's a privilege to have you, Luke. It really is, it's great. So Luke is a journalist, writer, and award-winning correspondent with The Guardian. He's reported from Delhi, Berlin and Moscow and covered wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya and Syria. Between 2007 and 2011, he was The Guardian's bureau chief. The Kremlin deported him from the country in the first case since the Cold War. In 2014, he won the prestigious James Cameron Prize. He's the author of several books, most recently the #1 New York Times bestseller, Collusion. Secret Meetings, Dirty Money, and How Russia Helped Donald Trump Win. Other titles include Very Expensive Poison, The Assassination of Alexander Litvinenko, and Putin's War with the West, The Snowden Files, The Inside Story of the World's Most Wanted Man and Mafia State, How One Reporter Became an Enemy of the Brutal New Russia. His books have been translated into 30 languages. 2 have been made into Hollywood movies. DreamWorks, The Fifth Estate, based on WikiLeaks, written by David Lee, was released in 2013. Director Oliver Stone's biopic Snowden, adapted from the Snowden Files, appeared in 2016. A stage version of The Very Expensive Poison premiered in 2019 at the Old Vic Theatre in London, written by Lucy Prebble. It won the Critics' Circle Award for the Best New Play. No terrorist group has deployed a nerve agent in a civilian area or used a radioactive mini-bomb in London. The Kremlin has done both. Luke, over to you.
Well, thank you, Cheryl. Hello, everybody. Hello, Windosr Festival. This is another kind of surreal out-of-body experience in our kind of age of plague, because I really enjoyed going to Windsor to speak last time, and now I'm at my home in kind of Hertfordshire, where I write all my books. It's a kind of bedroom come office come think place. But maybe I'll start with kind of breaking news. I guess many of you will have seen the New York Times bombshell report, which broke late last night in the US about Trump's tax returns. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I won't dwell on it extensively, but we now know that Trump in 2017 paid $750 in tax, and that for much of the last sort of 15, 20 years, he's paid no tax at all, has claimed a huge amount of money back, having racked up massive losses in the noughties after over expanding, of about $72 million. And what's also kind of interesting is that there's no direct trail to Russia. And obviously we'll talk about that. That's the theme of our discussion today. But there's some quite interesting sort of pointers, because what Trump did, he's almost been a sort of, rather than being a billionaire and a successful entrepreneur, he sort of played the role of billionaire and successful entrepreneur. And what we know is that a huge amount of his revenue latterly has come from foreign enterprises, foreign governments, and so on, who've cascaded money into his real estate projects, into his golf courses. And we can't sort of see beyond, but the beyond is definitely one vector, one mechanism whereby foreign money gets into Trump. And this is the kind of big question, one of the big questions about what exactly the Russians have on Donald Trump, why he behaves so weirdly and sycophantically towards Vladimir Putin. And we'll talk about that further, but one name that did appear in this morning's New York Times report is that of Aras Agalarov, who's a Russian oligarch and billionaire, a real billionaire, unlike Trump, who's a sort of faux or fake billionaire. And he was the guy who hosted Trump in 2013 for the notorious Miss Universe beauty pageant, where Trump was staying at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel, where allegedly he was videoed. He denies this, but I think he probably was videoed by the FSB, the Domestic Security Service, watching a show in his suite with two prostitutes, rather an exotic show. And Agalarov was the host. And I remember meeting Aris Agalarov when I was the Guardian's correspondent in Moscow. I was there in a show set between 2007 and 2011. And he's quite an interesting guy. I mean, he's charismatic. He speaks better English than Donald Trump does. He's a sort of Azeri, Azerbaijan-born Russian tycoon, who I came across him after he was beginning to get to know Trump. I sort of interviewed him in 2008, and he was constructing a sort of Trump-style resort on the outskirts of Moscow for the super rich, where different houses were constructed in different styles. He had baronial, Scottish baronial, he had neoclassical, he had a golf course. He'd spent hundreds of thousands of dollars importing boulders from Thailand. And he kind of drove me around in his little British Land Rover with his bodyguards in a bulletproof Mercedes following on behind him at a sort of respectful distance. And he was grumbling about the Forbes list, how Forbes, the magazine which does an annual ranking of the super rich, had lowballed his fortune, which he said was about $10 billion, and so on. So he was a kind of Trumpian figure, but also very close to power, because if you're a businessman or an entrepreneur in Russia, it's not like being Bill Gates or Steve Jobs or I don't know, someone in this country, Richard Branson or James Dyson. Basically, if the state asks you to do something, if Vladimir Putin kind of picks up the phone or one of his people from presidential administration rings, you have to do it. And one of the kind of enduring mysteries of the whole Trump-Russia saga is when the Russians started cultivating Donald Trump. And there are sort of two answers to that question. One is he was definitely on the radar in the 1980s, and I write about this quite extensively in Collusion, my previous book, when Trump traveled to Soviet Moscow, to Red Moscow in 1987, the summer of 1987, and discussed with Soviet officials building a Trump Tower in Moscow. You know, ring a bell. This is 4 decades ago. It's been his great white whale that he's been chasing ever since. And he would have been bugged, and he would have been surveilled. There'll be a file somewhere in the archives, in the KGB archives, of what he said. There'll be a psychological assessment of him. So they were interested in him back then because Trump exhibited all of the kind of classic characteristics of someone who might be useful. It's not that the KGB or the Russian state back then knew that 3 decades later he would become president. It's that they play a long game, and Trump, they figured correctly, what was narcissistic, was impulsive, was unfaithful, loved money, was corruptible, suggestible, all of the qualities that you would want in a potential asset, which doesn't mean that Trump was recruited by the KGB in the 1980s. It just means that they became very familiar with him. And his model back then was to sell condominiums to anybody, but in particular to East European gangsters, some of whom paid cash. So we had the kind of 1980s moment, various trips by Trump to Russia in the 90s and noughties. But what's interesting, and what the New York Times kind of reminded me this morning when I read it, was that really there was a kind of a second cultivation operation which began around 2011, 2012, 2013. And it coincided with several things. It coincided with Trump being the foremost exponent of birtherism, which is this fake, false, baseless conspiracy theory which says that Barack Obama was not born in America, but is actually African and a Muslim. And Trump was the main exponent of this. And I think, I mean, we can't know for sure until the Putin regime goes down, but I think this is what drew him to the attention again of the Kremlin. And then we have Agalarov flying out to LA, getting to know Trump, going to a strip show with Trump in Las Vegas, and then inviting him to Moscow. And what the Times had this morning, the New York Times, they they had so the Aguilaras paid Trump $12 million for the licensing rights and as a flat fee to stage the Miss Universe contest in Moscow, which Trump co-owned with NBC. But on this deal, they made a loss of $10 million. It's quite a lot of money to lose. Meanwhile, a couple of years earlier, we had another Russian oligarch called Dmitry Robolovlev, who bought Trump's mansion in Florida, in Palm Beach, for $100 million, which is about sort of $70 million more than it's worth. And so if Trump loses in November, I think there will be a cascade of new information. And we've got a lot today from the New York Times. And I think it will show more and more the kind of financial connections. Because if you look at this kind of crazy, strange 4 years that we've been through, which I've tracked. I've written 2 books about collusion and shadow state. This one here, my new one. The one sort of consistent theme in Trump's otherwise dysfunctional and now frankly quite boring presidency is his obeisance towards Putin, and that's something I explore in Shadow State. But maybe I'll just rewind a little bit. That was the kind of breaking news. Just to explain a little bit more about myself. As Cheryl said, I'm a sort of long-time correspondent on The Guardian. I lived abroad for 12 years. I was based in New Delhi covering South Asia around the time of 9/11, and I did George Bush's wars, first of all in Afghanistan, then in Iraq. Then I was posted to Berlin for a while and did side trips to Baghdad, and arrived in Moscow in early 2007 with my wife Phoebe and our 2 then quite small kids. And I lasted 4 years in Moscow. It was a pretty kind of torrid time. I wrote a previous book called Mafia State, which is a memoir which details some of our experiences. But just in short, we had a series of break-ins by the FSB, the KGB successor agency, which Putin used to run, in our family apartment. And we were advised by the British Embassy in Moscow that our apartment was bugged. There were these kind of crude break-ins where Putin's goons left all sorts of obvious signs for us to find, kind of low-level signs, windows open next to my son's bed or bust open when we lived on the 10th floor and there's a huge dip below. Family photos deleted from my laptop. And on one occasion, a sex manual in Russian, which was left by the side of the bed when we were away on holiday in Berlin, and I came back to find it and bookmarked to a page on orgasms, and then talked to the British Embassy to try and figure out what the hell was going on. And basically, they explained that we were bugged, we were being surveilled, that there were some kind of recording equipment in our flat, probably video as well. And the reason I mention all this, apart from the fact that in a way it's kind of darkly humorous, I mean, it was awful, but kind of grimly funny, is it sort of goes to the heart of some of the allegations about Donald Trump. And if you could sort of think about the allegation, for example, that the Russians have got compromise on Donald Trump, and that might in part explain his behavior towards Putin. Everyone I spoke to, and I spoke to lots of sort of former intelligence people for Shadow State, they all understand that the FSB, it's what they do, like the KGB did. They would for sure have surveilled Donald Trump, both in 2013 and previously. They'll have video of him, because if the KGB FSB bother to spy on me, the marital bedroom with my wife, when I'm basically a kind of a slightly irksome foreign correspondent, they would naturally spy on a prominent American celebrity or politician or head of state or foreign minister or whatever. It's what they do. So basically, my sort of 4 years in Russia, which were characterized by me trying to delve into various unwanted themes, including the murder of Alexander Litvinenko, the dissident who was poisoned in late autumn 2006 with a radioactive cup of tea in London. That story really haunted my stay there, and afterwards. And I wrote a book about it called A Very Expensive Poison. But that experience was kind of useful analytically for understanding what's going on now and what's been happening in the last few years. And essentially, I would say that Russia had kind of perfected techniques of repression, of sabotage, of subversion, of propaganda in the world of Facebook and Twitter and social media. Sort of perfected them at home before taking them on the road internationally. And one thing the Russian state does is to poison its critics. And the Litvinenko story has been a big part of my professional career. I've become very close friends with Marina Litvinenko's widow. My book, A Very Expensive Poison, as Cheryl said, came out in 2016 after a public inquiry, which I reported on for The Guardian, concluded that Putin had probably approved the murder operation in London using radioactive polonium, together with his then FSB spy chief, and had almost certainly dispatched the two rather gormless assassins, Dmitry Koftin and Andrei Lugovoy, who went to London to do this kind of fell deed. So I kind of explored that. I mean, that was a KGB technique which went on throughout the Cold War, stopped more or less in the 1990s when Boris Yeltsin was in power, and there was a period of expanding cooperation with the West, but came back big time with Putin, who really, in some ways, is a sort of restorationist president, in the sense that he has restored the KGB method of dealing with domestic critics, but also of interacting with the world. So we had that poisoning. And one of the reasons I wrote Shadow State was I assumed, having done Litvinenko, having followed the case, having read many of tens of thousands of documents, police evidence, scientific material, that nothing comparable would happen again. And in fact, actually what we've seen over the past 2 decades is Putin doing something egregious, doing an outlandish thing that you'd think would be impossible, like sending assassins to kill a critic in the UK, waiting for a response from the West, from the European Union, from America, from the UK. And thus far, the response has been rather conventional. It's been diplomats expelled. It's been hard words of harsh rhetoric, but there have been few practical consequences, and then carrying on. And so what we saw in the spring of 2018, so just over 2 years ago, what was a kind of almost a sort of copycat operation of what had happened with Litvinenko in 2006, 2 more Kremlin assassins, this time working for the GRU, Russian military intelligence, who had been sent to rub out another traitor, someone whom Putin regarded as a traitor, which is Sergei Skripal, who was living quietly in Salisbury. And this forms a sort of dramatic opening of my book. I mean, all of my books are basically nonfiction thrillers. I try and channel the spirit of John le Carre, whom I know a little bit. I mean, after Collusion came out, he invited me for a whiskey. So in other words, they're true, but they're sort of rendered dramatically. And you know, what's interesting was that Putin felt sufficiently powerful that really he could do another kind of murder operation on British soil. This time using Novichok, a rare Soviet nerve agent developed in secret laboratories in the late Cold War in the late 1970s and 1980s, which essentially was a sort of calling card. And I spent some time sort of discussing the meaning of Salisbury. I mean, there's the horror aspect, for sure. I mean, it was a horrific, premeditated crime done by professional executioners who turned out to be not terribly competent because the Skripals survived. But also, I think it was a message. I try and sort of decode it. In part for the UK, it was a message that you are kind of weak, that we can settle our accounts, on your territory whenever we want, that we despise you, a sort of message of contempt for MI6 in particular, an organization that Putin loathes. But also, I think it was a pretty unambiguous sign to the Russian elite, and particularly to people working for Russian spy agencies, who have been involved in many of these operations we've seen all over the place in recent years, to say that if you betray the motherland, if you collaborate with Western intelligence, which is what Sergei Skripal had done, he'd worked for MI6, he was double agent, then we will come for you and we will crush you. And one of the things I try and explore in the book is how we should think about the sort of contemporary Russian state, because yes, it's aggressive, yes, it's revisionist, yes, it does these terrible operations to kill critics of the Putin state, but there's also something kind of blundering about it and comic, darkly comic in a way. I mean, if you think about the interview that the two Salisbury killers or would-be killers, real names Chapiga and Mishkin, fake names Petrov and Bashirov, they gave an interview to Russia Today in the summer of 2018 where they claimed that there were vitamin salesmen who had been beguiled by Salisbury and its wonderful cathedral, the tallest spire in the UK, and its medieval clock, and they'd done 2 journeys on successive days because it was snowing the first day, and it was really such a kind of shonky, flat pack, fake account of what had been going on that they seemed risible, and the sort of primary impulse was to laugh. But I mean, I kind of liken the GRU and sort of Russian spy agencies generally to a lethal and shambling golem. And the golem appears at the top of your high street, of your village, and you think, look, there's a golem, isn't it dumb? And it goes kind of sort of careening down the street. And it's funny until the golem raises a fist and smashes your roof in. And that's the problem, is that yes, I mean, the Soviet state is not omnipotent. Putin's method is opportunistic. He will try things and see whether they work, and if they don't work, he'll just move on. And if they do work, he'll repeat them. But there is a sort of there is a kind of brutal effectiveness about these spy agencies, and they kill people. They kill people, and I think until the West gets a kind of coherent response, they will continue to do this. They'll lie about these operations and so on. So the one strand is murder, and these secret diversionary operations carried out by a undercover kill team, Russian kill team, which until recently was stationed in Europe, happening abroad. But we also see another theme of the Putin regime, which I explore, is the murder of domestic critics. One of whom, Boris Nemtsov, whom I knew, former deputy prime minister, opposition leader, was shot dead just outside the Kremlin in February 2015. But also most recently, happened after my book came out, the poisoning with Novichok again of Alexei Navalny. And Navalny, who's now in Berlin, he was visited yesterday by Angela Merkel in a Charité hospital. You'll all remember, he was poisoned last month while he was in Siberia on his way back. Initially, we thought with a cup of tea with Novichok in it. Now we think he was probably poisoned in his hotel room. Collapsed on board a plane heading back to Moscow. Plane made an emergency landing. He was stretchered off, flown to Germany, and German doctors managed to revive him by injecting him with atropine, which is this antidote, same antidote used against the Skripals. And the thing about Navalny, he is such an impressive person. He's everything that the sort of Kremlin politicians are not. He's tall in a regime led by very short ex-KGB men. Not that I'm being heightist, but it's a fact. He's charismatic. He gets social media. He does these brilliant investigations. He makes videos, exposes corruption at the top of the state. And to my mind, I think it's pretty clear that Putin authorized the operation to kill him, as he did with Alexander Litvinenko. And in the Litvinenko case, we have the judicial finding. But in the case of Navalny, I mean, it's simply, I'm being deductive here, I and other people who kind of follow Russia closely, that the sort of Russian system is overwhelmingly bureaucratic as it was in Soviet times. And in Soviet times, Stalin or other Politburo leaders would discuss the murder of enemies abroad. An oral order would be given or instruction. No records would be taken. And this was decided at the very top of the state. And I think Navalny is a person of such stature, he's been a thorn in Putin's side for a long time, that no one else would take it upon themselves to kill him or try and kill him with Novichok unless they had some kind of sign off from Putin. So the body count piles up. Navalny fortunately survived, but these murders, these flamboyant murders, are only one part of the story. Another part of the story is social media. I mentioned Facebook and Twitter, and what we saw in 2016 was an enormous operation, really, to kind of mess with the heads of American voters, to sort of persuade them that Hillary Clinton was a warmonger, that she was going to a sort of neocon and so on, and to try and sort of push Trump at the same time. This was run out of a troll factory in St. Petersburg, where sort of essentially mostly sort of cynical 20, 30-something Russians were paid to pretend to be Americans, to impersonate Americans on Facebook, to arrange pro-Trump rallies and so on. And these same trolls, they used to be quite easy to identify. They sort of typed rather bad English, but they've improved in recent years to the point where they're kind of indistinguishable from real Americans or real Brits. And again, what's interesting is this whole idea about Putin taking the Soviet playbook and updating it, because the KGB used to do these influence operations in the Cold War, never with much success. But what social media has done is it is massively extended the reach of Russia and other malign actors to try and interfere in our democracies. We saw the same trolls were active pushing for Brexit in 2016. Just to be clear, wherever you stand on Brexit, whether you like it or whether you hate it, what you have to acknowledge is that Vladimir Putin is a fan of Brexit. It's, Russia wants Brexit because he thinks it will primarily weaken the European Union, which is his kind of main foe, main impediment to him essentially restoring the dominance that the Soviet Union used to enjoy in Europe, especially in Eastern Europe and Central Europe. So he hates the European Union. And also he sees the UK as a sort of junior partner of the US, the main enemy. And the calculation in Moscow is that Brexit will damage the EU. That's true for sure, but will also sort of diminish Britain as a political power, as an economic entity, as a military power, and maybe even hasten Scottish secession as well, and an independent Scotland, all of which Putin welcomes. So we saw two parallel Russian espionage operations, one to help Donald Trump in America, another to push Brexit. I detail the numerous meetings in my Moscow Gold chapter, clandestine meetings, I have to say, between Aaron Banks, biggest donor in British political history, who gave almost £8.5 million to leave EU, and the Russian ambassador at the time, Alexander Yakovenko, which we only found out about later. And one other point to make, I think, before we go to questions, is that there are parallels with Soviet times, for those of you who can remember the Cold War, but there are also sort of differences. And when the Soviet Union was around, when the USSR was there, the main vector of influence operations, active measures as they're known, was obviously the far left and communist parties. And the KGB funded under the table French communists, Italian communists, who were really quite powerful in the post-war era. They even funded the American Communist Party, not that it really got anywhere ever. But it was the far left was the channel. And now, really, in recent years, what Putin has been doing has been, his preferred partner has been the far right, not just in the UK, but across Europe and elsewhere. Xenophobic, populist, anti-EU parties. And I think sort of Putin's strategic goal is to try and smash the moderate center and push voters to the extremes, and to fuel cultural conflict, political conflict. And, when I sort of think about this, Putin isn't the person who causes or caused ethnic divisions or tensions in America, or the huge kind of clashes that we're seeing between coastal liberals and Trump supporters who regard Trump as a sort of anti-politician and the Messiah. I mean, he didn't invent all of that, but what he's trying to do is he's like, there's a fire burning, he's the person who pours more paraffin on the fire. He's trying to accelerate these tendencies so that we are so consumed with our own kind of conflicts that we lose sight of what else is going on. And what's going on is that Russia is trying to, under Putin is trying to restore Russia's place in the world as a great power. He's trying to make Russia great again, if that rings any bells. It's an imperial idea, or a neo-imperial idea. He's described the end of the Soviet Union as the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. And he wants Russia to be a great power, a co-equal to the United States. He wants to sort of take us back to a 19th century model of global politics where powerful nations overrule smaller nations. And he's fantastically cynical. I mean, he's not only is he a kind of king of chaos, he's also a sort of supreme nihilist who thinks that there are no values, there's no morality, that human rights, democracy, liberalism, that they're all just a sort of sham. They don't mean anything, and that ultimately all politicians are as venal and corrupt as the group of oligarchs around Putin who run Russia at the moment and control its natural resources. And moreover, that Western politicians have a price or a kind of point where you can kind of grab them, and that you can buy them. That our society is as corruptible as Russian society. And just to finish up on this slightly depressing theme, I mean, there are more uplifting things to say, but maybe we'll do that for the questions. He's had tremendous success in the UK, I think. I mean, it's a cross-party problem. It's one that was addressed by the Russia report, by Parliament's Intelligence and Security Committee, which Boris Johnson tried to hide. Well, he did hide for 9 months. It was ready before the last general election, and we only got it in July. And the Russia report, it's actually a very good document, it's worth reading, says that so much Russian money has been washing through London, it's become Londongrad, that Russian business and Russian intelligence are intertwined, that oligarchs connected to Putin are playing a big role in British public life. And we've seen big donations from Russian emigres to the Conservative Party. It's one thing I've been kind of investigating as a journalist on The Guardian. And we've also seen, crazy though this seems, and I explore this in Shadow State, we've seen Alexander Lebedev, whom I know very well from Moscow, KGB colonel, become the proprietor of the Evening Standard and the independent newspapers, installing his son Yevgeny as sort of gentleman proprietor of these media titles. And Yevgeny has been hosting these parties, Christmas parties, attended by A-list actors, by politicians, Prime Minister, Tony Blair has been to them, David Cameron's been to them, Boris Johnson's been to them a lot. And I just, for those who are perhaps skeptical, you know, I'm not saying that Russia or Putin is this sort of supervillain who controls everything, that he sits on a desk in a study with black leather upholstered chairs, flipping little red buttons and controlling events in Windsor or in Washington or in Berlin or wherever. He's not. He's a sort of classic KGB opportunist who will use these levers of corruption and state capture to try and prevail. And in the UK, he's been very successful, or he and his proxies have been very successful at cultivating British politicians, giving them lucrative directorships on Russian companies, or inviting them to vodka and caviar parties. And I really worry about this. I worry about the fact there's been no reckoning in the UK, like there has been to some degree in America with the Mueller report, recent Senate Intelligence Committee report into Russian interference. Current government seems extremely unwilling to look at these things. We can be certain that you know, Putin will outlast Trump for sure, will probably outlast Boris Johnson, and there will be more poisonings, there'll be more trolling, there'll be more propaganda. And we need to understand this phenomenon, which is why I wrote these books, and we need to try and do something about it. Thank you very much, Cheryl.
Well, I don't know what to say about that.
Sorry, it's kind of depressing, but it's important. You need to know it.
No, of course, of course. Okay, well, our first question comes from Edward, and it says, how do you suggest the West escalates their response to Russia whilst avoiding a war or other serious implications?
Yeah, good question, Edward. I think, well, I mean, I think two things. I mean, first of all, just to sort of pick up from where I left off, we need to interrogate this stuff. I mean, again, I know sort of everyone's sick of Brexit, and it's an endlessly sort of polarizing theme. But whether you love it or hate it, it's really important that we find out precisely what Russia did or didn't do in 2016. Whether you think ultimately it may have tipped the result, which is one thing I personally I believe, or whether you think that's all nonsense. The point is that what the Russians are doing today, the Chinese will be doing tomorrow, and the Saudis the day after. And because of this connected world we live in, with social media, with sort of opaque money flows and so on, it's much easier to game politics than it used to be. So we need to have a kind of proper inquiry into Russian interference and into foreign interference in general. I mean so we've got a kind of factual basis for discussing these themes. But secondly, the other thing we can do, which is not war, is we need to expand the number of people who are sanctioned. Now, a few oligarchs around Putin have been sanctioned by the US, by the EU, by the UK, but too few. And what you have to understand is that the sort of Russian regime, it's sort of hyper nationalistic. I mean, it really is very, Crimea-ars, very aggressive, huge propaganda at home. But actually, what the people around Putin really care about are their billions. They're all billionaires by now. They've been with him for 2 decades. They're some of the richest people on the planet, possibly the richest group of people in human history, worth well in excess of $500 billion collectively. And they hate sanctions. It means they can't travel. It means they can't access their wine collection in Switzerland. They can't sail their yacht with their mistress in Corsica. They can't go shopping in London. They can't send their kids to Eton. Is that too controversial a point for the Windosr Festival? I don't know. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Anyway, sue me. But they can't access all of the pleasures and educational benefits and privileges of the West because they're barred, and they're also kicked out of the dollar bank accounts. It's an enormously powerful tool, and yet we just don't see it much used. We see the National Crime Agency. They've got these new unexplained wealth orders. They've done 2 prosecutions of very low-hanging fruit, a kind of Azerbaijani woman who's married to a kind of big-time crook. But there seems to be no willingness to go after oligarchs, many of whom live here and have their money here, because if you have your money in Russia, someone will steal it. So you have it in the West, and probably you have your family in the West as well, and you kind of coexist. So we need a proper sanctions regime, and I think that would at least be more of a deterrent than what we have at the moment.
Okay, I've got another question. You'll probably have to help me out with the pronunciation of the surname. But what are your views on the murder of Anna
Politkovskaya?
Thank you.
Well, it's a good question. I mean, I was in Moscow. Well, first of all, Anna Politkovskaya, she was murdered. Her flat was 5 minutes away from my office in Moscow. I worked in my office, which was a sort of dingy 2 low-ceiling Soviet apartments knocked together into one, with a small kitchenette, a view of green grass and the odd dog walker, in a block run by UPDK, which is the sort of used to be the foreign relations property arm of the foreign ministry. Completely bugged my office. It was made obvious to me that it was bugged. But anyway, around the corner is Politkovskaya. She was shot dead just before I got there in October of 2006. 3 weeks before her friend, Alexander Litvinenko, close friend, was poisoned in London. And I covered the trial of her killers. The first trial, there were several, where they were eventually acquitted. These were sort of Chechens. She was shot by an assassin as she got out of the lift at the bottom of her flat from point blank range. they may have been the killers, I don't know. But the point is that the zakazchik, there's a word in Russian, zakazchik. Zakaz is to order something. So the person who ordered the hit was, of course, never identified. Now, everybody believes that it was Ramzan Kadyrov, the president of Chechnya, who was, by the way, she was killed on Putin's birthday. So it seems, if you interpret it, it was like a kind of bizarre, ghoulish, gruesome gift to Putin from Kadyrov. And of course, Kadyrov was never questioned, never interrogated. He's still president of Chechnya. But he's most likely responsible for it, for her murder. But the sort of moral responsibility lies with Putin. Whether he signed off on that operation or not, he has created an environment where his security agencies, or indeed sort of semi-autonomous actors like Kadyrov, can do these rogue things unpunished. And I just say lastly, I mean, Polikovskaya, I know I didn't meet her, but I've read her stuff. I mean, she was a brilliant writer. She was fearless, brave, obsessed, in some ways unhappy. I mean, people who fight the state are not necessarily perfect individuals. I mean, that they get scared, but they carry on. I mean, they're some of the bravest people I've ever met. But she was right about Putin. I mean, her verdict on Putin in her books about Chechnya was correct then and is still correct, and she's worth rereading.
Okay, question from me, and I know we've talked about this before. I mean, do you worry that, or you have concerns that you're being bugged, and do you worry for your life? I mean, I know you consider yourself an irksome correspondent, but I mean, you're sort of, you're telling the West what it's really like, and that must be of some bother to Putin, surely.
Well, so my wife and I, Kiz and I, we went through fire, or some fire in Moscow. I mean, it wasn't fun having these break-ins. I mean, I kind of told it when I was speaking just now. I sort of told it as if it were funny. I mean, it was kind of funny, but also it was psychologically unsettling. It was meant to be, because we had people in our flat, in our bedroom, in our kids' rooms, doing all sorts of strange things. And the goal, by the way, the Stasi and other East European security services did the same thing. I mean, it's quite documented. It's the KGB technique developed in the 60s and 70s. The goal, I think, was for my wife, Phoebe, to throw up her arms and say, darling, I can't take this anymore. Let's go. Let's go back to London. And so they just replaced me with someone who's perhaps more biddable. And instead, I kind of discovered a sort of inner steel, which I didn't know I had. I mean, I decided I wasn't going to go. I understood better the nature of this regime, because we had our own secret story going on. I didn't make it public at the time. I told Alan Rusbridger, the then editor, who was in touch with the Foreign Office. So I talked to the Foreign Office a few times about it, took advice from them. But also, it made me really angry. And if I'm honest, I'm still angry. But the strange thing is that anger is kind of productive anger. I mean, it kind of drives my investigation. It drives my reporting, because I sort of feel, I want to shine light on these people. And in a way, it was completely counterproductive. I've written 4 books on Russia now. I mean, they're being turned into TV dramas. I mean, one was a hit play. I mean, actually, it would have been much better to have left me alone, not least because my wife, who by the way is rather cool, was writing about sort of Russian tourism. I mean, she was walking and doing articles for the Moscow News about Tolstoy's palace and Pushkin and Russian theater and music. And I was doing the dark and she was doing the light. And between us, yin yang, between us, we had everything, because it's a great country, Russia, with brilliant people, but run by a kind of baleful, evil regime. But we were booted out. And I think actually, first of all, the real heroes of the story are Russians, not foreign correspondents like me. And also, I mean, I don't think I'm at risk, because they assume that I was a kind of undercover spy working for The Guardian with some literary ability. I don't know quite where their fantasy came from, but that's what they thought. That by day I wrote stories which appeared on The Guardian website, and by night, I don't know, I went to a rock and left a clue and received orders from MI6 to badmouth Putin the next day. I don't know what their fancy was. I mean, it was ludicrous. And it was partly a product of mirror thinking, because in Soviet times, Soviet correspondents abroad in Paris or New York or whatever, working for TASS or ITA-TASS or other Soviet agencies, they were all KGB. And so they assumed that we must also be kind of spy operatives under journalistic cover. But the point is that there are rules for how you handle foreign spies. In my case, you watch them having sex with their partner. You try and spook them over their kids. You bug their phone calls and you follow them around, but you don't kill them. And different rules for Russians who are regarded as traitors, who can be killed and who are being killed, have been killed, will be killed. So, but having said all of that, they still do really annoying things. And you know what? I'm pretty certain they've started hacking my phone again. My phone's been hacked a couple of times in the last few years. And no one please tweet this. This is just for, between us. But a couple of days ago, I was really kind of, it sounds weird, but I've been sending a few emails to myself on my iPhone about an investigation I'm doing. And it was a Russian language document featuring a Russian embassy, the FSB, secret cocaine, and an expose. And it didn't arrive in my mailbox, and I sent it a few times. I sent other things in the Russian language, but I also sent my wife a photo of a curry I'd cooked while the kids were away, and she was doing a travel feature. I was quite proud of it, so I sent her that, and she never got it. And then we were traveling over the weekend, and about 20 emails with the same minute from my phone. All of this Russian cocaine stuff arrived, plus all of the messages I sent her, which hadn't arrived on her phone in the same minute. And the thing is, it sounds insane, but I know how they operate. They do these tiny deniable things that sound a little bit crazy if you talk about it, just to show that they're there. It's a kind of little winky. It's like a sort of wave from far away to show we're watching you. We're across your comms, by the way. Last time my phone was hacked, things like, my home address started popping up at the top of my inbox, which was kind of very weird. Old emails with my home address came back, and we sent it off to, also our experts looked at it, then they referred it to government experts. And they said I'd been hacked by unknown persons who'd entered my iPhone via the cloud and had cloned it. So basically, they're still out there. I mean, I laugh at them. They may be watching this, Cheryl. Who knows?
Well, get Chorleywood on the map, eh?
but it's like there's a big dog, really big, aggressive, yappy dog, and a small dog. And I'm the small dog. But sometimes, there's the big dog doing its thing, and then sometimes the small dog barks back and the big dog runs away. And I sort of feel that's kind of how it is much of the time.
I've got another question I've got quite a few more questions now. I've got a question from Linda, who says, can you expand on how you see the options for Putin leveraging Trump after an election which Trump may lose and dispute?
Well, Linda, it's a good question. I mean, I think there's been relatively little Russian mucking about this time. I mean, there's been some around the edges. There hasn't been none, but not on the scale of 2016. And I think in a way that's because Putin's got everything he wants. I mean, Trump has been such a divisive president who has essentially withdrawn America from the world, literally from various international treaties, but also as a sort of superpower. I mean, it feels like a sort of post-superpower under Trump. And meanwhile, the US is in a state of, you might call it kind of proto-civil war. I mean, you see these armed militias, some of them black, most of them far-right and pro-Trump and white, wandering around with huge arsenals. You see unrest over Black lives, black people being killed by the police. And you can see Trump already is not really running against Joe Biden. He's running against the idea of an election. He doesn't want there to be an election. He just wants to continue in power forever because, as we now know from the New York Times story, he's not a billionaire. He's hugely in debt. He's got $400 million of loans, which are due in the next 4 years. he needs to stay in power because the alternative is probably jail. I mean, it certainly looks like it'll be state and federal charges for tax fraud when he's out the door, and probably jail. So he will claim that he's won. He'll claim the election is rigged. He'll claim postal ballots are fraudulent. And then we just have to see. I mean, people who are there are better across it than me. I mean, I'm not there, but and obviously there's the Supreme Court that he'll have a 6-3 majority. And if he goes to the Supreme Court, they find in his favor, then I mean, not only is it a constitutional crisis, I think it's sort of more or less the end for American democracy. If Trump prevails, even if he loses big time to Joe Biden, then that's it. And what makes us think that the 21st century is nicer and more genteel than 20th century history? I think it's not. I mean, I think there are, without overstating them, there are definitely parallels to the 1930s here. And a second Trump presidency under those disputed circumstances would be a form of dictatorship.
Gosh, yeah, how serious. Okay, Matthew says, why do you think the Skripals and Alexei Navalny survived their poisonings? Was this a mistake or deliberate?
Yeah, good question. I mean, the GRU and I think the FSB probably did Navalny in Siberia. They wanted to kill Navalny and the Skripals. I mean, it wasn't just a kind of warning. The idea was to kill them. And really, it didn't work because of good fortune. I mean, certainly in the Skripal's case, they were close to Porton Down. Porton Down had trained a sort of chemical spill in similar circumstances before. The doctors on duty in Salisbury General Hospital immediately administered atropine, which is the antidote. And remarkably, that's also what happened with Navalny. I mean, I think if the plane had not done an emergency landing, he probably would have died. But it did. I mean, it just taken off and went right down again pretty quickly. And to begin with, the doctors there, I think he got a couple of shots of atropine, and then the FSB took over and that treatment stopped. But it looks like that kind of kept him alive. It's also a question of dosage. I mean, we don't know how much dose they got. I mean, Novichok is one of the most deadly substances on earth. We don't know anything about Skripal and his health, but I would be amazed if he's back to full health. I'm sure there are probably irrevocable consequences of what happened to him. And certainly with Charlie Rowley, the partner of Dawn Sturgis, who sprayed Novichok on her wrist and who died, one of my colleagues in Salisbury, who lives in Salisbury, guardian colleagues, is quite close to Charlie Rowley. And he 2.5 years on, he still has major health problems. He's out of breath all the time. He has fuzzy vision in his left eye. He has panic attacks, and so on. So they're meant to kill, and they were only saved because of prompt, correct medical treatment.
I mean, it sort of takes me on to my next question about Navalny. I mean, what's his future? I mean, not just his health, but politically. I mean, where's he going to go, and what does the future hold for him?
Well, so the regime have taken away his flat. This oligarch Yevgeny Prigozhin, who runs the troll factory and has a private mercenary army, the Wagner Group. I devote a whole chapter to him in Shadow State called the East India Company, and he is astonishing. Astonishing insofar as he was basically a Soviet thug and hoodlum who mugged people, got caught, got busted, spent 8 years in Soviet jail, came out, became Leningrad's first seller of hot dogs in about 1991, and using his criminal connections, built this up into a catering empire where one of his favorite repeat customers was Vladimir Putin, who used to dine in a floating barge he had in the river, the Neva River in St. Petersburg. And by the noughties, he'd become kind of catering not just to Putin, but to the whole of Russia. He got a series of lucrative contracts for the military, for schools. And then he became the kind of outsourced guy for Kremlin special operations. So he ran the troll factory and everything else. Sorry, remind me of the question. I've just got so carried away with Prigozhin.
Sorry, so what's the future for Navalny politically?
Yeah. So Prigozhin sued Navalny, and a phony court ruled in Prigozhin's favor, and Navalny's flat in Moscow has just been confiscated by order of the court. So he's now homeless, having been poisoned by the regime. But having said all that, I think he'll go back. I'm certain he will go back. He will go back I mean, he is already the de facto opposition leader in Russia, but he'll go back at even more enhanced status. But sadly, that doesn't mean they won't try again. And sadly, that doesn't mean that they won't kill him.
Yeah.
So I don't know where we're at. I mean, I don't think they'll try and kill him immediately, but he's astonishingly brave. He's an astonishingly brave individual. And I just, I've been in contact with him a bit. I mean, I've met him a few times, 2010, 2011. We've worked together on a couple of stories, but he is formidable. He's absolutely formidable. I just, in a different world, if you could reconfigure the cosmos differently, Putin would be in jail and Navalny would be president.
Yeah. Well, maybe one day. And another question from Edward. You describe Putin as much more than just a figurehead, but as a conspirator in chief. If this is the case, how do you anticipate the Russian state will carry on post-Putin, and what would need to happen for this to happen?
Well, without being too frivolous, I mean, Putin will have to die. I mean, it's become a sort of Brezhnevian regime, really, where Putin's already clocked at 20 years. He'll probably do longer than Stalin. He's just fixed the constitutional problem by having a constitutional referendum, another fake referendum, which means that he can stay until 2036, potentially, well into his early 80s. And if you look at some of the other despots in the post-Soviet neighborhood, they've also gone until their 80s. So I see no reason why he wouldn't do that. I think they want to live forever. I mean, for like someone out of the Old Testament, I mean, I think he'd like to live for hundreds of years. There is no successor. He sort of tried, when I was there, Dmitry Medvedev was briefly president. Putin was prime minister. They did a swap-a-roo, but Putin essentially was still ruling. My fear is that basically when Putin dies, and I really see the only way he's going to exit the Kremlin is going to be horizontally, there'll be a kind of neo-Putin. There'll be another short man with a series of complexes who will take over and do a sort of neo-Putinian model. I mean, Putin's death does not mean Russia will transform into a more liberal or plural democracy. Like I was saying earlier on, they've perfected all of these techniques of repression and brainwashing, of control via TV, of having almost a sort of dramatic script. It's like a box set being there where, for a while it was Syria. Russia is fighting bearded terrorists in Syria. We are helping. Ignoring the fact that Russian aviation were killing thousands of civilians. Then it was Crimea. Crimea is ours again. We have, reunited. We've saved Crimea from Ukrainian fascists. And I worry about what the next box set will be, especially if Trump wins. If Trump wins, it could be the Baltic states. It could be, another misadventure in Ukraine. It could be something else. And meanwhile, Russia is consolidating, capturing weak states in Africa, including the Central African Republic, is very active in Libya. It's already completely enmeshed in Syria. And is, becoming more and more globally ambitious at a time of European, self-preoccupation and disarray and American retreat. So, sorry, nothing good is coming.
No, okay.
Putin wants to be there forever, in short.
Yeah, for sure. But by out-of-state operations, I assume you include the Wagner Group in Syria and elsewhere, says a questioner.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I was just talking about. And they're kind of fascinating because the reason I called my chapter about the Wagner Group, the East India Company, is there's a wonderful quote about the East India Company, the 18th century sort of private corporation, but linked to the state, which essentially conquered most of India and much of the Far East. There's a wonderful quote from Edmund Burke describing the East India Company as a state in the guise of a merchant, and that's what Prigozhin is. Prigozhin is a merchant, sending his militia to I don't know, peacekeeping operations or whatever. But actually, most of these guys are ex-Russian army, are linked in with the GRU and so on. And it's all about deniability. It's this sort of postmodern thing of deploying traditional muscle around the world for strategic goals, but doing it through the vector of a private corporation. So it's a state, not state. I mean, I'm fascinated by sort of models of statehood, and it's that, you know, shadow state, obviously. I mean, it's a classic example of a shadow state. It's the state, but with a kind of private logo. They don't have a logo, but if they were to have a logo, it would be Wagner Group. And just one last thing on them. I saw a lot of secret correspondence involving the Wagner Group, which is in the book. There are photos of Wagner guys rolling through the savannah in Central Africa on military vehicles. But in these secret emails about the Wagner Group, they describe the troops not as soldiers or privateers. They call them musicians.
Oh.
So no one say that Russian spies don't have a sense of humor.
And then just to wrap up from your friend and my friend, Wendy Holden, you know, sort of.
Oh, hi, Wendy.
Hello.
Nice to hear from you again.
She says, I loved A Very Expensive Poison and look forward to reading your latest. What's next?
Oh, well, so there's only so much I can say. In fact, I can't really say anything, but so no one tweet this either, but the TV drama and possibly dramas are coming.
Wow.
But I mean, but on quite a big scale, I think. I mean, all I can say is that the Very Expensive Poison has been, which was a great. I don't know if any of you saw it. Watching was just a fabulous play by Lucy Preble. I mean, based on my book, but adapted by her. Witty, darkly humorous vaudevillian with a Putin character who addresses the audience directly and heckles from a box in the auditorium. It was more or less the last major sort of. It's up for an Olivier, but of course everything has been postponed because of COVID. You know, we got it in just before the pandemic started, and I feel terrifically privileged that we did. But A Very Expensive Poison is now also being turned into a TV drama, as is Mafia State. And I'm also in discussions about Shadow State as well. So I'm hoping the next thing. I mean, I'm not sure I can quite. If Trump wins again, I don't think I can quite face doing another book in which the word Trump appears in any form at all, even small. But I'm hoping the next thing will be TV drama, and also that the TV drama will reflect some of our story in Moscow, some of the story was telling earlier about our experience as a family, where we're looking over our shoulder, where we're being hounded by the secret police, where there are these clues being left to try and intimidate us, because it's a chilling tale, and I would love to see it dramatized.
Fantastic. Oh, how exciting for you. Really amazing.
So watch this space. I'll let you know if and when I come back next time. You know, if I've got news, I'll tell you.
Yeah, do come back. Well, okay, so we've got Shadow State here, and we've got signed copies at the Chorleywood Bookshop, which we can post out to anyone at this time, or you can come into the shop. Just let us know. So it just leaves me to say thank you so much for joining us this evening, Luke. An absolute privilege and pleasure as always. I endlessly fascinated by you know, what you have to say about Russia, and I know you do say to balance it, it's a brilliant country. You know, you speak Russian, and you know, you're sort of learning Russian, and you know, you love the literature and the people. I mean, there is, you know, it's not just all bad, but just to sort of give that some sort of balance. But you know, thank you so much, Luke. It was absolutely brilliant, and you know, come back to us and join us again with the next book with the word Trump in or out of it, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Anyway, and all the very best with this book here. Anyway, thank you so much. Anyway.
Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Thank you, Windsor, and hope to be back in the physical world next time.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, bye now.
Okay.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye.